Warning: this podcast may contain graphic and triggering content. Please listen at your own risk. Each individual struggle is different, and everyone's recovery and healing journey is different. Please reach out to a certified medical professional if you need help. Welcome to episode 16 of Stomp the Stigma, the podcast aimed to fight the stigma surrounding mental health through education, awareness, experiences, stories, resources, and the vulnerable truth. Joining me to Stomp the Stigma today is owner and director of Assured Psychology, Daniel McMillan. He is a registered psychologist right here in Alberta, but most importantly, he is a father of 2 girls and a normal human being. He's here to talk about how mental health and therapy can influence our relationships, whether that's with friends, with partners, or with ourselves.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good, thanks. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. I just wanted to thank you for taking the time to fit me into your schedule and sit down and chat with me. I really appreciate that.
Oh, no problem. Thank you.
So you're the owner of Assured Psychology, and you are a registered psychologist. Is that correct?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. How did you get into this field in the first place?
I was anticipating you might ask me that, and I was trying to think of which answer to give.
Is there more than one?
I feel like they're layered.
Okay.
I professionally, like if you look in my high school yearbook, it says I'm going to be a psychologist. Like I wrote that.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, I always knew. I always found people really fascinating.
Yeah.
Like even in my undergrad, I used to always study in the U of A hospital because I just liked watching people. I didn't do a lot of studying, but I liked watching people. So I mean, I always it was that or be a park warden. I either wanted to work with people or work outside. And so it just sort of went that path. But I was trying to think of like another layer to that question. And there wasn't an obvious answer to me, but I do find it an interesting coincidence that, so I grew up in a big family, and a loving family, but definitely a family where we didn't talk about anything. And now I talk to people about things for a living. Yeah. And I talk to them about all the things that I, at one point, tried to avoid, which is mostly emotion. So I find that really interesting. So I think there might be some implicit drivers at play in that choice as well. It's sort of the shorter version. I think the longer version is, I guess I don't want to give both versions. Some of my earliest memories were going with my father, who was a small town physician, on his rounds and talking to his patients and just interacting in the healthcare system and seeing what to me really seemed like really down to earth, really quality care and how to treat people. And that I think has been also driving what I do for most of my life.
Okay, so you have wanted to do this your whole life.
Mm-hmm.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Wow.
When I came out of my undergrad, I didn't go into grad school right away, so I actually worked doing counseling, but I was an addiction counselor for quite a long time. I worked in the schools a little bit, but then I worked in addiction counseling with youth, and then eventually went back to grad school, and then after grad school, worked as a psychologist.
Is there a certain kind of branch or, I guess, section of psychology that you like the most?
Yeah, I mean, I work in clinical or counseling psychology.
Yeah.
And that's my favorite by far. But I don't even like to refer to it as clinical psychology because over time, like the cool thing for me is that over time, people started really making sense. And what really started making sense is the humanity of us all. Meaning, and we'll probably get into this later, but we're all just suffering human beings trying to do our best with what we have accessible to us. And, if I lift a massive load on my shoulders, something will eventually give, whether it's my back or my knee or my ankle. And genetically, what gives is whether it's my back or my knee or my ankle. But if I have to lift that load for a long time by myself, something's going to give. And so the field I practice is counseling psychology, but I almost wish it's a humanistic stance of counseling psychology is I guess why I'm saying this, that over time has become more and more important to me.
I like that. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Okay, I know that all therapists are different, and a large part of it is finding a therapist who you connect with and you feel comfortable with. So, I guess my question is, what is your approach to therapy and helping somebody in need?
Yeah, so that also, almost all these questions have a short answer and a long answer. And I'll probably attempt a short answer and then move into a long answer.
Okay.
I won't stop myself. But I don't want to deviate too far. So the short answer is I practice a few approaches. I would say my toolkit in which I put all the other approaches is emotionally focused therapy. And then I borrow a few other approaches like somatic experiencing, like CBT, Rogerian, but EFT or emotionally focused therapy would be my primary approach. The longer answer is kind of a continuation of what I was just saying, which if I can truly see and understand and feel a person's pain and under symptoms, which is what we call mental health right now, is symptoms, is always pain, whether it's sort of an invisible, chronic, hard to put your finger on lack of something, or a more immediacy, acute thing like a trauma, or just a piling up of different things. So for me, how I approach is I try to, as a human being, see another human being suffering and understand it from ways that I see are fundamental, and then help them move away from their defenses that they did at one point to survive, or it was their best choice at that time, to numb, to shut down, to be anxious, to panic, to people please, to whatever, to get big, to get small. At one point, that was the best thing that their young mind could have created, and help them over time move away from that into the more organic parts of themselves that are innately healing, like their core emotion, like healthy relationships, like their body, like their own wisdom. So when I interview staff, when I'm hiring people, I ask them the same question, but I ask them not to give me any sort of clinical jargon or labels. So I guess right now what I'm trying to do is hold myself to the same standard.
Oh, I like that. That's a great idea. So, psychological work and counseling in general often dives into kind of the darker parts of people's lives. How do you kind of separate your work from your home life, or is that possible for you to leave that at work when you go home?
Yeah, again, I think there's two answers to this. The first, I've been asked that on probably every job interview I've attended, and so the first is it's very important to have ways to do so, to not carry that into your home. And so I've developed over years different ways. Colleagues are a really good way, a safe space to debrief. Nature, I almost always try to live where I can walk to work. This year is the exception to that, or the last couple of years. But activity, music. But I think the longer or the other answer is that I don't think you can to a full degree. Like I don't think you can bear witness to a person's pain and truly be a passenger, like truly be upfront and care, and that it just leave you because you went to the gym. I think there's a residual effect that you have to be really careful of, and to make sure you have ways to deal with that, so that over time you don't get hardened and cold or over intellectual or hierarchical in your work.
So do you think it would be more difficult for somebody who has a mental illness to pursue a career like that?
No, the stats, I don't remember the exact number, but they're roughly 50-50. 50% of people pursue for their own personal experience, and 50% just because they have sort of an interest. But I don't like the binary nature of that, or even of the idea of you have mental illness or not.
Yeah.
We all are suffering. We all struggle at some point. Some people qualify for certain labels, which can be useful.
Yeah.
I think what you do with your pain and your struggles, it has a lot to do with what type of therapist you are.
Right.
And what type of human being you are, honestly.
Yeah.
And so I don't think it disqualifies anyone. In fact, you could be a great therapist if you use that pain to give you wisdom. If it doesn't inform you, if it's still raw and you haven't done your own work, whether it's a mental illness or not, you're going to bump into things in therapy that you probably, like that may get in the way of your work with clients. So I think the question is really more, have you done your work? And again, when I interview people, I always ask them that.
Oh, I like that. That's a good point. You did bring up, not everyone has a mental illness, or there's different, I guess, levels of being labeled in that way. But everyone has mental health struggles of their own. And a lot of the time we overlook the fact that our therapists are not invincible and they're humans too. So just how do you take care of your own mental health?
Yeah, I think when I started and was younger, I felt like I had to be perfect.
Yeah.
And one of my heroes in the field once sort of said, if you're Rogerian, which means if you're empathetic, if you're present, if you're caring, if you don't judge people, they'll forgive you your mistakes. In fact, they'll like you for them. And it was this huge weight at that time. It was this huge weight off my shoulders. It was like, oh, good, because I have no idea how to not be flawed. That really sucks. But it's true. I think a lot of people think that because you're a therapist, you don't you're sitting on top of a mountaintop enlightened, figured all life out, and that is not the case in my experience.
Yeah.
So again, I think the staple answers are I do a lot of outdoor activities. I spend a lot of time with my kids. I do a lot of sports. Interestingly, combat sports help me balance. It kind of gives me the yin and the yang, I think. One of them being the more gentle, sort of softer sides of me, and the other being sort of this harder side. And I think it helps provide a balance in my life. So I would say mostly through physical activity and the people I love.
I actually do Muay Thai and boxing. And people tell me all the time that I'm this very calm soul, I guess, and that they could never picture me being this aggressive person. But I think that for me, anyways, it definitely balances out. When I go to class and go and hit the bags, and I have this whole, I guess, different side of me, and then I'm very calm and quiet usually otherwise.
I think there's a lot to that, actually. I mean, I don't know a lot about this, so I don't want to misquote it, but the idea of yin and yang is from ancient Chinese medicine, which is the idea that a person was ill because they're out of balance in either their masculine or feminine side, and every human being had both. So I think it's an important idea that we need to balance our different sides so that we can lean into each fully. The more I know my own power, the more gentle I can be. The more gentle and sensitive I can be, the more I can lean into my own power.
Yeah. Oh, I agree with that. Totally.
Yeah. And I actually think that there's a cultural thing here where men and women are sort of pressured to only show one half of that.
Yeah.
And then it creates an imbalance, even in insecurity in that half of it. So you're trying to prove it versus authentically be it.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, I do want to focus on kind of the couples counseling side of your practice for this episode. So I want to get into a little bit of that side of things. In my opinion, there is a stigma around going to therapy for a relationship. Usually you hear about people going for major issues like infidelity or something like that. But what are, I guess, other reasons that people would come to therapy?
I think because I've been doing it so long, it sort of half surprises me when a couple comes in, or one person of the couple is like, I didn't think we were this bad to go to couples therapy. And to me, I just hear that as like, it's like saying, I didn't think I was this sick to eat an apple, or I didn't think I had cancer, so why am I at the physician? Like, I mean, I think it's just because it's my world that I live in, but there's it's so weird that there's a stigma, because all relationships struggle, because all human beings struggle. And so, of course, some support would be a useful idea. But yet there's this idea that if you go to couples therapy, you're either on the brink of divorce, someone had an affair, or someone's about to tell you you're going to get divorced. A lot of usually men walk in saying, like, is she going to drop some news on me? Like, it's not the case. I would say the majority of people that come to couples therapy, while there's a good chunk that are on the brink of those things, the majority have just found that what they're doing isn't working for them in the times it needs to work for them. So the reasons people come to couples therapy are pretty simple in my mind. It's that there's some form of disconnection repeatedly in the times when they need connection. And it doesn't mean every day, it doesn't mean on the brink of divorce, but in the times, I'm going to back up a little bit, but human beings are hardwired to be a pack animal and to lean on each other. It's why it's the main determinant of our health and our happiness is our connection to other people. This idea that we're independent is a false sort of Western idea. I mean, Harvard just showed that the best predictor of how long you live in this life, your mortality, isn't how many apples you eat or how much exercise you get or your genetics. It isn't how much you smoke, believe it or not, or everything that we know not to do. I just took vitamins before this. Is not that. It's your childhood and then significant romantic relationships. Because when you take the wolf out of the pack, its nervous system goes haywire. If the wolf lives like that, it doesn't do so well. So when human beings feel disconnected in our moments when we need our partner, our moments of joy, our moments of hurt, our moments of loneliness, if we feel like that and we can't reach them and be responded to, or we can't let that in, our relationship struggles in some way. Sometimes that looks like conflict. Sometimes that looks like not saying anything and just two ships in the night growing apart. And that's really the thing that drives people into couples therapy. Affairs, divorce, all these things are sort of the snowball rolling down the hill pretty far at that point. So sort of symptoms of disconnection.
So how does a couple know when they should try therapy or when they should just end the relationship?
Yeah, I mean, that's a hard question, and a lot of people have differing opinions about this. I'm a big advocate that you should try. If there's anything left in you that wants to turn to that person and wants that person to turn to you, and I don't mean like out of defensive hurt, you're like, no, I don't want to need them. But if that part of you is truly dead, you're completely apathetic to this person, empirically, that's a hard place to come back from. But everything outside of that, it's worth trying. And even that can be worth exploring. Are you just shut it down and you're numb, or are you genuinely switched off for this person truly? So I'm a big advocate that people give it a kick, like get a kick if they can. That said, there's some disqualifiers. If there's ongoing partner violence, intimate partner violence, if there's abuse, that's not a time that therapy is useful, because you can't ask a person to be vulnerable and open up to someone that's abusive to them. I want to be careful with the word abuse because I think it's misused a lot of the time. People throw it around, but true intimate partner violence that isn't just situational, something bad happened once, but ongoing, and the person's unsafe sexually, physically, financially, even emotionally to some degree, then it's not a time for a couples therapy. It's a time to make sure you're safe and to create a plan of how to lead the relationship safely.
Do you ever see couples that they come and sit down in front of you and it's clear to you that they shouldn't be together? Does that ever happen for you?
If that happens, then I should not be seeing them as a couples therapist.
Okay.
So if I'm forming an opinion about that, I have to be very careful of that. It means I'm not actually seeing what's bonding them, connecting them. It means unless, again, there's, unless those things I said, unless there's some form of unsafety, true unsafety, the lack of safety, or a person's genuinely done, which isn't that they shouldn't be together. It means that person's, it's called a burnt out pursuer most of the time. But other than that, if that's my opinion, I need to consult. I need to think about referring them, because my job, and there's the reason I started KyrieCouples.com and the couples part to be such a big part of Assured Psychology is just because at that time I couldn't find a good couples therapist, and it is so important, so crucial, and there's so much bad, myths and bad practice, and like I think it's 80% people that say that you'll see couples have no formal training in it, and even of the modes that exist, the modes of practice, methods of practice, there's really only one, maybe two that are empirically higher than 50%. Like the rest are bad, terrible odds. So my point being, if you think that someone's sitting there like a judge trying to decide who was right or wrong and then get you to see it, that's not actually useful couples therapy in my mind. Couples therapy is looking at how people disconnect the dance they're doing, that when they're trying to protect themselves, they do this and that does this, that person does this. So classically, one person feels the disconnect, they get big, they criticize or get angry. The other person feels a lack of safety, they shut down and pull inward and get quiet. That creates distance. That makes the other person protest and get more critical or get more intense. That makes the other person feel less safe and like they can't do enough right, and they pull back further. Those are the patterns that people need to see and then learn how to reach from a different place. And truly, in that dance, it's 50%. You get 50% of all responsibility and blame. There's no more, no less. Anything outside of that and someone's judging you, it's not. I don't believe that to be useful.
So how can therapy help a relationship that involves mental illness, whether that's in one partner or in both?
Yeah, that's such a big question. And so I would say both for relationships and for family work, when I've done both, I've never, or I haven't often used the opportunity when the other person comes in as a chance to sort of teach that other person how to support this person. Believe it or not, and there's others that would definitely do that and disagree with what I'm about to say. I see it as an opportunity to impact the relationship so that that person can voice to that person what they need. That person can hear it. That person can voice back how overwhelmed they are, tired they are when the other person's resource. Now I'm making it confusing. So when a couple comes in and one person is struggling with whatever, anxiety, depression, or both, I take a fairly non-pathologizing approach. So does EFT, but I sort of work it into their cycle. So like the example I just gave you, maybe instead of critical, which isn't diagnostic, maybe that person actually gets intense rage or threatening behaviors, or alternates. They threatening behaviors and then pull away and leave. Maybe the other person stuffs their feelings inward so often, so much, and can't be seen as all alone that they start to feel very down and very helpless and depressed. Yeah. So for me, helping to understand the mental illness and the label of that into their dynamic, because it's sort of it's something they bring into the relationship. It's also something the relationship either helps or hinders, and it plays a role in their dynamic, if this makes sense. So I don't have a simple answer. Yes, self-care is very important for both partners. Right. Yes, setting boundaries is really important. Yes, having outside support, seeing professionals when you need, all that stuff is helpful. But again, I'm very hesitant to the idea of one person is the broken one and one person is the fixie, and let's give suggestions to the fixie to help the broken one. Right. I think that understanding how this dynamic plays into the relationship and helping them learn to change that is sort of fundamental to truly a holistic and wraparound approach for someone that's struggling with mental illness. And empirically, this has been shown. Like a healthy relationship greatly people's mental well-being.
Yeah. I like that a lot.
So I don't think I'm answering your question, but I'm explaining why I'm not answering your question.
No, I like that perspective of getting partners to kind of work together and understand each other rather than having one person come in and like try and fix the other person. I like that.
Yeah, I call it the fixie fixer, and I've fallen into that dynamic before. I've been the fixer and brought on a fixie. And really, are they more ill than I am? Ill? Or is it just not our stuff showing up differently?
Yeah.
I picture couples like a room full of broken plates. We kind of find ones that we fit just correspondingly different. We make a bigger plate. We also poke each other very, very much. So I think we all kind of come into this with our own stuff. We find people at the time we meet them, at least, of equal and just differing stuff, quote unquote stuff. That's a very clinical term. Yeah, I mean, if I could tell a story, this story was told to me by Sue Johnson, who created EFT, and I love it. I tell it a lot, but to me, it captures the answer to your question. And I don't know the accuracy of any of this, so I'm telling her story, giving her credit, but also her blame if it's completely false historically. But apparently the Celtic people at one point, she's English, but she's told the story that the Celts at one point had this philosophical view of life, that life was being in a dark tunnel, warring dragons, many of which were immortal, meaning you would eventually lose to them, you would die. And they believed at that time that the purpose of life was the battle. And what she said, and this was like 15 or 10 years ago, what she said was that they actually got kind of close, but what we know from about 40 plus years of attachment science and many other sciences is that life is like being in a dark tunnel warring in mortal dragons. Many things you can't defeat, your own death being obvious, illness, the death and illness of everyone around you, but also world events, COVID, for example, your past in some ways, your partner stuff, in-law, like there's so many things, housing prices, whatever the stress is, babies. And it's being able to reach out in that darkness and find the hand of the person you love. And when you can do so, it changes the entire experience of that battle. You will still eventually lose, you will still succumb, but to know you're not alone changes your experience of that battle. And so when I sort of think of what couples can do to support each other, to me that is the fundamental thing. Can I reach to you in my core vulnerability, in my core emotions? There's only 6 of them. It's not complicated. Can I truly show you my sadness, my shame, my fear, my joy, my core anger? Can you hold it and be there with me? And can I do that for you? And it turns out when people can do that, they do okay. Knowing we're not alone is so crucial. And we kind of downplay that in our culture, at least. I know that sounds simplistic, but in my experience with people, that's fundamental. Do you want to hear my not so clever version of that story? It's kind of crude. It's mine. So this shows the difference between her and I. She's much smarter. I picture like you're driving. I live in Cochrane, so I picture like someone's coming out to Cochrane for appointment or come from Cochrane, Calgary or whatever. And they take separate cars and one car rolls into the ditch. And another, you pull over and you run out and are you okay? And your partner's sitting there and their arms broke, but they're trapped, but they're okay. They're not in a life-threatening situation. They say, yes, I'm okay. My arms broke, but I'm okay. And you try to get them out and you can't. There's no way to get them out. You say, okay, well, I've called the ambulance. I've called the fire department. I called 911. They're coming. It's going to be about 14 minutes. They say, okay, good. Okay. And you say, okay, I'll see you at home then, honey. I'll see you in a little bit. And you get in your car and drive away. Like, that's preposterous, right?
Yeah.
But you can't change it. You can't fix it.
Yeah.
But we just know that being there matters. Yeah, that's my less eloquent version.
I like it.
I've told that dragon story probably, I don't even know, 500 times, and it makes me tear up every time.
Oh.
I think because there's something innate that it touches inside.
Yeah.
And it seems to have an impact on people. It touches inside of us all.
Yeah. Oh, it definitely does. Yeah. So everyone has their bad days, obviously. How do you know if someone or even yourself is struggling with more than just your average case of the blues? And I guess for a partner, if they are aware of someone's struggles, or unaware, I guess, or suspect one, like what are some of the warning signs of something that is more than just your average case of the blues?
First, I think average case of blues is still okay to get support on.
Yeah.
The earlier you can stop a snowball rolling down the mountain, the less extreme it gets, the less intervention it takes. So I think we live in a culture of self-dismissal, meaning most of us, out of our fear of our own vulnerability, but have learned to dismiss our own emotions in some way or another.
Mm-hmm.
And then they show up in a secondary form, and that creates all sorts of problems. But so I just say that because I don't want people to think, am I bad enough? If you're not doing so great, and that's a felt sense, you deserve support in some kind. And if you continue to not feel like you're doing so great, then you deserve the next level of support. I mean, warning signals or red flags are obviously some of the more obvious ones are suicidality. If you start to, believe it or not, thoughts of suicide are fairly normal over a lifespan, and actually some degree of that can actually help a person cope.
Mm-hmm.
To know that there's an exit door in a burning building helps people stay in a burning building longer. But thoughts of suicide, starting to really develop a plan, think about acting on it, like when the lethality of your suicide urges starts coming up, that's definitely a time. But I don't want to list all the DSM, but there's any sort of form. If you struggle to really get out of bed, struggle to find joy in life, if you're having panic attacks, if you're not feeling like you live in your head the entire life, you're drinking to cope, smoking to cope, it's a giant list. But I think something in all of us has a sense of when we're not living from a peaceful place. Mm-hmm. and there's a point when that starts to feel overwhelming. Our emotions exist for a reason, and one of the reasons we have these feelings are to tell us when something's not right and to bring attention to it. If my knee really, really hurts and I ignore it, it's not a great idea, because it means something's getting not looked at, and it could get worse. So I know I feel like I'm deviating a lot of your questions, but I think that felt sense inside people, like they're unhappy, mm-hmm. Life's not what they want it to be, and that could look like because they want to die tomorrow, or that could just look like they just don't feel fulfilled in their life. Mm-hmm. Then they should reach out. We all should.
Yeah, but that's not always as easy as it sounds.
No, that's the heartbreaking part.
Yeah. Okay, you did touch on communicating with your partner about your mental health issues or struggles, and I really like your approach to kind of appreciating each other and communicating. Is there any advice that you could give to either party on how to communicate with the other person in a more effective way?
Yeah. There is, but I want to warn you that it may not work initially. Mm-hmm. The patterns we get into, the systems we get into in our relationships are fairly stubborn. And what often happens is, or almost always, one person or both people have tried something different and it didn't work, so then they went back to their old way of defending themselves. Right. So I say that, but I don't want someone to hear this, be like, hey, I tried to be vulnerable, didn't work, going back to not talking for a week or whatever. Yeah. So, if it doesn't work persistently, obviously that's what couples therapy is for. You can try and read a book or go to a retreat. Sometimes that's helpful. But usually it needs couples therapy. But yes, the advice is, it's going to sound simple, but if as best you can, talk from the core vulnerable place, not from the defense. What I mean is, we probably mm-hmm. all kind of know the things we do that aren't helpful, but yet we keep doing them. Mm-hmm. So if I'm in a conflict with someone I care about, I can do a couple of things. I can numb and get quiet. I can turn into the know-it-all psychologist. I can intellectualize. To win an argument, I can try to quote research, which is really useful about my own life. So if I notice I'm doing any of those things, what I need to do is go below and find what am I really feeling? Feeling sad that I'm not seen or important. I feel afraid that I won't be heard. I feel like I don't matter. That's a big one for me. And I need to vulnerably speak from that. It's not a guarantee that a person can hear it right away, but how our mirror neurons work is super cool. If you on this video call saw my finger snap in half and break, you would go, ow, and feel pain. You wouldn't need to do it to yourself to know that hurts.
Yeah.
We actually pick up on the emotion, the core emotion we see in another person, and feel it ourselves. So when someone can be vulnerable and say, hey, when you were late on our anniversary, that made me feel like I didn't matter to you. That made me feel like, everything I do, I try so hard that it's not enough. And that really hurts me. And also, that's exactly how I felt for so much of my childhood. And that's devastating to me. And when a person can share that, the chances of the other person reacting and meeting them are much higher because it pulls their mirror neurons. They feel sad. They may block that. That's why I said couples therapy might be needed. They may not be able to hold it. But definitely the chances are better than if I say, you're late again, you're always late, you obviously don't care, your work matters more, and I don't even know why I'm with you. I mean, you can guess how that person's going to respond to that.
Yeah.
Either argumentative or defensive or appeasing, but it won't make either of us feel better. So yeah, the tip is hard to do. It's simple but hard to do. All those defenses you learned when you're little, they're not useful anymore. You just need to be able to have control over them, intention over them, and learn how to be vulnerable and speak to that. And it won't guarantee you won't be hurt. It just increases your chance of getting what you need. Right. And the other person not having to do what they, because when you do your defense, it pokes them in their deep wound, and they do their defense and they pokes you in your deep wound. Yeah. So I don't like to give things like I statements or you soften startups. There's a whole big list, and if you want to sell a lot of books, you can give a few suggestions on them, love languages. To me, what's really important, and I feel like I'm going on, but this is crucial. It's important to understand that we only have 3 attachment strategies. That's it. And they're obvious in babies, but they're for life. The baby can call and be responded to. If no one does that, our entire species doesn't exist. Right? Like we're the most helpless mammal born. Horses walk within an hour. Even baby gorillas can hold their mama's fur and be carried around. We can do 0. If we don't call and that matters to another person and they feel our call actually, they register on that side and it causes them distress enough to act to lower that distress, we don't exist. Who would get up at 3 a.m, night after night after night with a baby otherwise? This is our number one attachment strategy is I need you, I reach for you, and my core need, and you meet it. Now, only about 28-30% of the population keeps that through their life because most of us get socialized that we can't do that. The homes we grow up in don't talk about things, or it's not safe to talk about things, or it's too chaotic, it's all anger or whatever. So then there's 2 other strategies. If you ignore that baby, it actually goes berserk. Like it gets that cry. I don't know if you've ever heard that shrill baby cry that everyone on the plane hates. Like, it I always felt like it literally felt like it was cutting me into the bone. Like it's impossible to ignore. So they do what's called protest, and if that gets ignored, still, they actually shut down, look like they're asleep with their eyes open. They totally go inward and withdraw.
Oh wow.
Yeah. So these are only 2-3 strategies. So you can see this in grown-ups. Can I tell you, like I just said, hey, this really hurt, or I'm really lonely? Can I show that to you as my reach? If not, which most of the population unlearns, then I've got 2 strategies left, and people tend to adopt one primary strategy. I get big, I protest. I get really intense, or I get critical, or I just come forward, or this is when people are called quote unquote needy, and I put that in quotations. Or I overtalk, or I'm going to plan every detail of life, or I get really anxious, or the energy is a forward-moving energy, or I go inward. I shut down. I numb. I distract. I maybe I have to use substances, or maybe I just do it myself, but I just go inward and shut down. We all have all three strategies inside of us, but people adopt a primary one, and sometimes people adopt a combination of them.
So is there a difference between, I guess, healthy and unhealthy communication?
Yeah, for sure. Yes.
I mean, I guess you kind of gave an example of that already, but
yeah, I think, again, it's like there could be a giant list of ways to unhealthy communicate, but ways in which you're protecting yourself that aren't actually bringing you any closer to the relationship.
Right.
And I don't want to, there's obvious ones like attack or anger, rage, criticism, but there's also the other half of the coin: numb, quiet, shut down, walk away. So sure, anything that detracts from your relationship is not a healthy communication way. And I think, at least for myself, what I got lost in for a long time before I learned all this was, which was worse? Well, my way was just getting quiet or going in my head, so that's not worse. At least I'm not the person yelling in safe way. That person's the bad guy, not me.
Right.
Yeah, they're just different.
So is there a difference between, I guess, the way you should communicate with a partner who has mental health issues versus communicating with someone who doesn't? Or is that all the same?
No, it's the same. I think in a partnership, we all have a responsibility to be, as best we can, sensitive to the other person's stuff. We're not responsible for the other person's stuff, and we're not mind readers. And that's a big pitfall that people fall into, is expecting that person to just know. You have to actually tell someone what you need.
Yeah.
But we do have a responsibility to be sensitive to their stuff. And so, whatever that looks like, it could look like someone's struggling with depression. It could just look like someone's, in the middle of their residency to become a physician and they're totally burnt out, or whatever. So no, I don't think it's any different. Just the degree in some moments is different.
So a part of supporting someone who is struggling with mental health issues, whether that's in a relationship or not, is having those difficult and honest conversations. Do you have any tips for people on how to approach those difficult conversations in a more respectful way?
Yeah, I think the thing we're all tempted to do is to speak about you and not I.
Yeah.
And so just talking to your own experience, Alana, when you did this last week, it's still been bothering me. I've been feeling blah, 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 blah. And what I really need is this.
Okay.
So I think, again, just trying to show up from your vulnerable self rather than your defended outer crust. Because that can really further the fixer. You did this. You're really not doing well. You're really broken. You need to go get help. This is all on you. Once you do that, it'll be okay. But I'm not telling you how terrified I am, how scary it was to watch you do that, or how overwhelmed I am. I've come to the hospital, visit you every day for 2 weeks. I need a break, but I'm scared to ask one because you're the one struggling, or whatever it is. Yeah, it's a tricky balance. I can appreciate it's a tricky balance.
Yeah, absolutely.
I keep saying the same thing over and over because it ends up coming down to very difficult but very simple things, which is how we're innately built to connect, and not being and when we do that, we don't feel alone. When we can successfully do that, and then we can kind of solve. I don't solve problems for couples. They often come in. I want, what should we do with their kids? What should we do with sex, money, blah, blah. Just give us the thing to do. What happens in this situation? That's honestly not my job. And every time I've fallen in that trap, it works briefly and then doesn't work. And then they feel disillusioned and give up, or it's just one more thing doesn't work for them. What my job is to align couples together so that they can learn how to reach and be responded to and let that in both ways. I say that because often with one identified patient or one identified mentally ill person, it's usually only one way. And then they figure out how to balance breaks and time away and all that stuff. Who's watching the kids or doing what chores, and that's a huge relief for me because I do not want to I play judge and tell you what to do. People always want coping skills, and here's the 5 things, but it doesn't work that way. If it did, you could just read it off Google and be done, and it wouldn't be any issue. And the book you read 10 years ago, you would have changed everything. It's a process. It's not content. If that makes sense. It's our humanity. How do we interact with the other human being we're being close to? How do we get our needs met? And when we can't, then what do we do with that? And my job is to help people find a way to have those bonding conversations, and then they resolve it. And it's really cool when they resolve it. Like at the end of couples therapy, they talk a lot. I don't talk that much, and they figure out cool stuff. And I would never think of it. It would never ever cross my mind to create a spreadsheet for this or whatever. But it works for them.
Yeah.
So I'm really glad I didn't suggest doing it a different way, because it wouldn't have worked for you.
That's a really good point. I think there's a stigma, or I guess a misconception about couples therapy or relationship therapy, that you are there to be this like middleman that's going to take sides and tell them which person
Who's
is
wrong?
Right or which person is wrong.
Yeah.
And that's not how it is at all.
Yeah, it should. It's not that way with some approaches. Some approaches, some therapists may still practice that way. But in my mind, and speaking from mostly folks therapy, that's not useful, because that's part of their dynamic. One person needs to be right. One person has to, be the tail between the legs, wrong for a couple of days to keep peace. Like, yeah, I can't remember the saying exactly, but basically, if you want to be right in a relationship, you're not going to be happy. It's really not about that. But I will say about your point, a lot of people come terrified of that. In my own experience seeing it, it often seems to be men come in really scared for that, or scared that they won't have the tools asked of them. But yeah, often someone comes in really scared that they're going to be told that they're the bad guy. They're the fault of the relationship struggling, which is really shaming.
I guess stemming off of that point, if you or somebody is interested in starting therapy or trying therapy and their partner is not interested at all, how does somebody approach that situation?
Yeah, that's hard. It's really hard, and it happens a lot. You can lead a horse to water, you can't make it drink. It's really hard. I think trying your best to have honest conversation with why you really want to go to therapy, how worried you are for the relationship, or what's driving you. And I don't advocate for this, except for in some more extreme cases, sometimes a boundary has to be set. Like when you're saying, like, should people try therapy before divorce? Like I said, most times, yeah. Sometimes a boundary has to be set that, it's this, or I'm heading out the door. Like, will you try? I don't suggest that people use that as a tool immediately. Like, and I think also on the flip side, to be fair to that person, trying to be open to hearing their hesitations. Because there's usually some secret ones, like I'll be judged, or I'll be the bad guy, or I won't know what to say, or I'm a really private person, and it's going to be weird to let someone in, or I don't want to talk about sex, or whatever it is. Yeah, but that's a hard scenario. It's really hard. In my experience, but it's totally a biased view, because I only see people that come. I don't see people that don't come. But in my experience, a lot of people come when one person doesn't gently suggest it. It's when one person has to insist.
It's kind of an ultimatum.
Well, hopefully
or not quite that far.
but on occasion, couples that show in an ultimatum are often at a place where it takes more work.
Right.
Where couples, when one person just said, I really need you to hear me. I really need to do this. And another says, okay. But yeah, sometimes it's ultimatum. Ideally, it's that they, and maybe this is changing as the world changes. Someone says, this could really, like, we're good, but we could be better. Let's figure that out. So I love those couples. Those couples are so easy. I love all couples. Like, they're all really great. I shouldn't say that. But the longer a pattern develops, it's like a cancer. The more it takes over, the worse it is. The harder it is to remove.
Yeah. So obviously with the pandemic, there's been a lot of stress on relationships. We've heard divorce rates going up and all of these things either making or breaking relationships. In your opinion, do you think that the pandemic has created destructive issues in relationships, or has it just brought kind of hidden issues to the surface that already existed?
I think it's done a few things. I think it's it's an obvious stressor that's added onto a relationship. So everything has a tipping point. Like the amount of pressure a bridge can hold, there's a limit on that.
Right.
And if an extra 100 pounds shouldn't make a difference, or extra 1,000 pounds, but how close to that edge or that limit it is will influence that.
Right.
So I think for a lot, it's an obvious pressure that has exacerbated a lot of people's issues. Also, a lot of the ways that people naturally coped. And again, we're a packed animal, and online isn't the same. It's good to not give up interaction, but it's not the same shared space in person. I think some of the ways we naturally cope mean that we're not able to support or self relationship like we used to.
Right.
Also, for a lot of couples, there's not much distraction anymore. If you are away 3 weeks out of 4 every month, you have a certain type of relationship. It doesn't mean a bad relationship, but being home all 4 weeks will definitely change that relationship.
Yeah.
But for some couples that kept busy or kept away from each other or filled their lives, to be just sitting in the same space day after day. So I don't think it's created anything. It's added stress, which on everyone, which is people have either came together over and faced that dragon, or slowly separated. And since all couples have existing issues, it can definitely, like the fault lines, that's where the cracks will happen. So it's shown up, like couples I think are noticing those more now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
so I think it's just fast forward timelines of dealing with issues to some degree.
That makes sense. Okay, I have one last question for you that I like to ask most of my guests. Is there a stigma or a misconception surrounding mental health that bothers you the most, or that you hear most often that isn't true?
Oh man, I could talk about just this question broadly. I could just go off on it. Yes, but it's different from most people's.
Okay.
So with mental health and with addiction, the original model was what is called a moral model, which is it's because you're bad.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
So it's why we lock people up, because they're bad. So for a long hundreds and hundreds of years, that was the model. You're weak or bad. That's obviously ridiculous. So then we moved to the emphasis on the biological model, which helps defeat the shame of bad to it's biology. It's my brain. It's neurochemical. However, that's shown to be quite simplistic. That's an influencing factor for sure, but it's our brains are social beings and they're also environmental beings. I mean, this conversation is happening neurologically, so it's more complicated than just that. But I think that offered for a lot of people, and I want to be very, very clear about this. A, there's legitimacy to that influence, including medication, and B, it offered people shame, the break or moving away from the shame of what's wrong with me, I'm broken, I'm wrong, like everyone else, which is, I think, really important for those people, and often they hold it like a lifeline. Problem is that we can't stop there. We have to understand it more nuanced, and that's why at the beginning I talked about our humanity, because that's what I learned when I first started working with people. Being less secure, I wanted to follow the model our culture gives, which is you go see the person, they tell you how to fix it, you fix it, it's gone. So that means you as the fixer needs to just be able to eliminate this thing, needs to tell them clearly what it is, and here's the steps. But our humanity is way more messy than that. Like our minds particularly, and our ways of being. So at first I grasped onto really concrete ideas. And over time, when I could kind of move away from my own insecurity about not being the best person there was, or client be disappointing me or something, I started listening to my clients, and I've probably had, I don't know, 10,000 clients or something, but I started listening eventually, and they are the ones that taught me, in my mind, what really matters, which is, yes, yes, our neurology and our genetics matter, but epigenetics clearly shows that those things are triggered by our environment. We have a lot of genetics we don't express. Yeah. So what they started showing me is that their mental health struggles are often symptoms of pain, either current pain or historic pain. And the way that they dealt with that pain, which now shows up as a symptom, actually maybe helped them at that time, was the lesser of evils. And that the fundamental things that human beings need are, we need relationship, we need to feel cared about and safe and not alone. We need to be able to feel and express our core feelings, all 6 of them. There's only 6. And one of them, surprise, joy, shame, fear, sadness, core anger. We need to be able to feel that, express it, and matter to another person. And when I sit with people, sometimes there's obvious injuries, which I call the car crash injuries, like you broke your femur in a car crash. You had this obvious terrible trauma happen to you. A lot of times it's the lead pain of our lives, which is the thing you ingested every day that you didn't know. You don't know why you got sick. But the lead pain actually determines the injury of the car crash. The best determinant of how long a sexual assault trauma, how the impact it has and how long that lasts for a person, is what was the response of the caring adults in their life. Mm-hmm. How did they attach it? So I think the thing that I want people to understand is to be able to see past this simplistic understanding without adopting more shame. Instead, adopt compassion for their humanity, that we all suffer, that it wasn't your fault it happened to you. You were doing the best you can. But to begin to honor your pain now, the little bits you can, so you can begin to let go of it. Mm-hmm. Rather than have to keep defending it in these ways that no longer serve you and keep replicating it into your life. And then, you're diagnostic, like you qualify for pathology sometimes, or you're just not, your best self and not happy. That's the piece that and I don't know how good a job I did explaining it, but I think our field is far behind on this. Not all, but I think so. I think psychology is so insecure that it's not medicine and came late to the party, that is trying really hard to be seen as a science, that we've forgotten the humanity part. Mm-hmm. And that's pretty critical. I'm sure there's a lot of people that would agree with what I just said, but that's the piece I want people to understand, is just the Buddhist form of suffering is pain times resistance equals suffering. Without resistance, there is no suffering. There's pain. Yeah, you still get hurt, but it's only in our resistance to that suffering, that pain, that we create suffering. I can stub my toe and it hurts. If I stub my toe and then I bite your head off for it, I'm going to feel terrible after. I'm going to suffer. You're going to feel terrible after. My point is to begin to honor our pain of our humanity, and we all have been hurt. So rather than boxes of I am or I am not this, or I did or didn't have trauma, or I did, instead, one of my favorite quotes is, no one gets through this life unscathed. In what ways did those invisible hurts, and they aren't always what was there, they're often what wasn't there. Yeah. Who did you lean on? Who was there for you in your dark moments, when you were sad, when you were scared? No human being is comfortable with all core emotions. That means no parent is. And as a parent, this makes me sad to say, but it's true. That means we won't always be there and responsive to our kids as they need us to be, which means, and if they can't talk to us about that, we can't repair it, they'll internalize it. They'll figure out their own meaning, and it'll be about themselves. Mm-hmm. And they'll find their own way to cope. So I just want people to see their humanity compassionately and weave that into their understanding of their symptoms, not either or. And know that there's no shame in that. We're all exactly the same. We all have the exact same amount of worth. We're all hurt human beings trying our best. Some people had a harder hand of it, and so their struggle.
Mm-hmm. See, this is why I love this question, because it is different every time.
It's a great question.
I like that answer a lot.
Oh, good. Thank you.
That is all the questions that I had for you. Is there anything that you wanted to touch on that we didn't?
I find interviews challenging because I want to hear your perspective on what I shared. I feel like I just rambled a bunch. So is there anything you want to share?
I've never really talked to a relationship therapist or a couples therapist, and I think in my mind and my, I guess, perspective of society, there's so much stigma and misconceptions around going to therapy while you're in a relationship. But I love your kind of take on it or your approach to therapy, and I think all of your advice has been fantastic. So
thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. My advice is people should access support and therapy. It doesn't mean you're
Yes.
not a bad thing.
I absolutely agree. Yeah.
Yeah. So no, I don't think I have anything more to add. Okay. It's a nice day. I hope you enjoy it.
Oh, thank you. You too. If anybody wants to reach out or has more questions for you, can they do that, or how do they do that?
Sure. Yeah. Good point. I always forget that. Yeah. Just our website is assuredpsychology.com. Assured, not insured. Assuredpsychology.com. We have a second website called calgarycouples.com. They're all part of the same company. It's me and my team. There's 6 of us. We're in Calgary in the Kinston location, and we have a Cochrane office. And we all have very similar approaches. So yeah, people can just reach out, find us online, reach out there. And I encourage people. It doesn't have to be a professional, like we're helping to support you, but just I think if people can hear permission to begin to be compassionate to self and be vulnerable and need the people in their lives, and it's okay to reach for those people. That's what I would hope.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I want to thank you for taking the time to sit down with me and giving your advice and your expertise. I think this has been such a good conversation, and I think a lot of people will appreciate the vulnerability and honesty. So thank you. Thank you so much for tuning in today. Feel free to reach out at any time. You can contact me on Instagram and Facebook at Stomp the Stigma YYC, and you can email me at stompthestigmayyc@gmail.com. If you like the podcast, please like and subscribe on YouTube, Spotify, Google Podcasts, or Apple Podcasts. And if you or someone you know would like to come on, I would love to have you. Share your story, speak your truth, and together we can stomp the stigma.